There are maybe 5 remakes in gaming history that genuinely surpassed the original. Not matched it, not honored it respectfully, actually surpassed it in almost every measurable way while keeping the soul of the thing completely intact. Resident Evil 4 Remake is on that list. And the fact that we are sitting here in 2026, 3 years after it launched, and it is still being recommended as one of the best action games available, says something that no review score can fully capture. But here is what nobody really talked about enough at the time. This game was not just a technical upgrade, it was a complete rethinking of how the original story deserved to be told, with characters who actually feel like real people, a tone that balances horror and action without dropping either one, and moment-to-moment gameplay that holds up against anything released since. Whether you played the 2005 original 100 times or never touched it, the remake stands completely on its own, and in some ways that confidence is the most impressive thing about it. The setting pulls you in immediately. Leon S. Kennedy, now a hardened government agent several years after the Raccoon City incident, is sent to rural Spain to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley Graham, from a mysterious cult called Los Illuminados. That setup sounds simple, and intentionally so. With the original Resident Evil 4 understood back in 2005, and what the remake doubles down on, is that a clear and focused premise lets the gameplay and atmosphere do the heavy lifting without needing to constantly explain itself. You know why you are there. Everything else is discovered. What the remake adds to this foundation is a version of Leon that actually carries his past. The original Leon was charismatic and fun, but emotionally flat. This version has weight behind his eyes, small moments of hesitation, quiet references to things that broke him before, a relationship with Ada Wong that feels genuinely complicated rather than just flirtatious. The writing throughout is sharper than the original without losing the self-awareness that made the original so entertaining. There are still ridiculous one-liners delivered with complete sincerity, and they still work perfectly because the game earns them through good characterization first. Ashley, who is one of the most complained about elements of the original game, is a completely different character here. She is not a passive object to be protected. She communicates, she adapts, she makes decisions under pressure, and there is a specific extended sequence in the middle of the game where she is separated from Leon entirely and has to navigate on her own. That section reframes her entire role in the story and genuinely changed how players felt about her. The fact that Capcom did this without making it feel forced or like an apology for the original is a serious achievement. Krauser and Salazar and Ramon, the supporting antagonists, are all elevated in similar ways. Salazar in particular goes from a cartoonish villain in the original to someone whose fanaticism has a readable psychology behind it. Krauser's backstory, expanded through optional content in the remake, gives his conflict with Leon a history that makes their eventual confrontation hit harder than it ever did before. Now, the gameplay. This is where the remake earns its place in the conversation about the best third-person action games ever made. The controls are modern and tight in a way the original physically could not be. Over-the-shoulder aiming, free movement while shooting, a parry system that rewards timing and aggression, and a knife that is now a fully integrated part of your toolkit rather than just an emergency option. The knife can be used to parry enemy attacks, finish downed enemies faster, break out of grabs, and stealth kill enemies from behind. It degrades with use, and keeping it repaired costs resources, so every decision about when to use it carries actual weight. The resource management and merchant system from the original return and feel more refined, selling treasures, combining gems into higher value items, buying upgrades for specific weapons, and managing a limited inventory space all create a constant low-level decision layer that keeps your brain engaged between combat encounters. The attaché case system, where you manually arrange your items like a satisfying puzzle, is one of those mechanics that sounds annoying on paper and turns out to be genuinely enjoyable in practice. Every player has a slightly different setup and will defend it irrationally, which is the mark of a system that actually works. The enemy design builds on the Ganado formula from the original and pushes it forward in ways that kept even veteran players genuinely uncomfortable. Regular Ganados move more unpredictably, use weapons more intelligently, and coordinate with each other in ways that make crowd management a real skill, rather than just a shooting gallery.
The regenerators, which were terrifying in the original, are even more unsettling here because of how the sound design has been rebuilt around them. The audio in this game is doing something specific and deliberate with every major enemy type, and playing with good headphones transforms the experience entirely. The village, castle, and island structure from the original are preserved, and each location has its own distinct visual and mechanical identity. The village section establishes the tone with cold, gray, desperate environments that feel genuinely threatening. The castle expands the visual palette into something more ornate and gothic, while maintaining the tension. The island shifts into more of a military and industrial aesthetic for the final act. Transitions between these sections never feel jarring because each one is introduced gradually through smart environmental design rather than a hard cut. Visually, in 2026, this game still looks genuinely excellent. The RE engine continues to be one of the most technically impressive foundations any studio has built, and the way it renders fabric, skin, wet surfaces, and fire in particular is still competitive with much of what has released since. The character models hold up without question. The lighting throughout, especially in dark interiors with limited artificial light, creates atmosphere that graphic power alone cannot replicate. Good art direction has a longer shelf life than raw resolution, and Resident Evil 4 Remake is proof of that. The original score is rebuilt rather than simply re-recorded, which was the right decision. The new music maintains the DNA of the original while expanding emotionally in sections where the remake asks more of the player. The merchant theme, which anyone who played the original can hum from memory, is treated with the respect it deserves. Sound design elsewhere is exceptional. The specific crack of Leon's bolt-action rifle, the wet thud of a knife entering something it should not be entering, the distant sound of Ganados reacting to your presence before you can see them, all of it is considered and precise. The side content, specifically the merchant requests and the optional blue medallion shooting challenges, reward exploration without demanding it. Finding these optional tasks adds an hour or two of content that varies in creativity but never wastes your time. The Separate Ways DLC, which covers Ada's perspective running parallel to the main story, is substantial enough that it deserves to be mentioned alongside the base game. It adds roughly 6 hours, reframes several main story moments from a different angle, and gives Ada's character more clarity than she has in any previous entry. Replay value for this game is genuinely high, which is not always the case in linear action games. The New Game Plus mode lets you carry over weapons and upgrades. The harder difficulty modes change enemy placement, add new enemy variants, and require you to actually understand the parry system rather than just use it occasionally. There's a knife-only challenge. There are S-rank time requirements. For the subset of players who want to go deep, this game has enough layers to support dozens of runs. For players who finish it once and move on, the 12 to 15-hour main campaign is dense and satisfying without overstaying its welcome. The weaknesses are real, but minor in context. The final island section, as in the original, is the weakest third of the game. The shift towards more military action and less atmospheric tension loses some of what makes the first two-thirds so compelling. A few of the boss fights in the late game prioritize spectacle over mechanical interest and end up feeling less memorable than the fights that came before them. These are not fatal problems, but they are consistent with where the original also dipped in quality, which suggests Capcom made a conscious choice to preserve the structural shape of the game even where it worked against them. Resident Evil 4 Remake earns a 4.5 out of 5, and the half point it loses is almost entirely from that final act losing atmospheric tension. Everything else is close to a template for how this genre should work. The combat has depth without being inaccessible. The story respects both its source material and the audience's intelligence. The characters are real enough to make the stakes feel genuine. The technical execution is clean, stable, and still visually impressive 3 years on. In 2026, with action games coming out regularly that have bigger budgets and more open worlds and longer playtimes, Resident Evil 4 Remake is a reminder that focus and craft matter more than scale. It doesn't try to be everything. It tries to be one specific experience executed as well as possible, and it succeeds at that so completely that it set a standard other remakes are still being measured against. If this review helped or reminded you why this game sits where it does, drop a like on the video. Subscribe for more of these long-form breakdowns where the only agenda is figuring out whether a game actually holds up. Share this with someone who's debating whether to play the original or the remake, because the answer to that particular debate is not as complicated as people make it. And leave a comment telling me which section of the game you think is the strongest, because that argument between village, castle, and island people has been going since 2023, and I genuinely want to know where you land.